What is up everyone? I'm J-Semp and we are back here with another art video. So as you can probably guess, we're doing part 2 of this epic drawing. So a couple weeks ago, I made a video about the start of this crazy, surreal, large, massive drawing that I'm planning on doing. And so I'm gonna put a clip on the screen right now of what we did last time, which was basically create the outline of this crazy piece. And in this video, we're gonna be coming in with details for the eye portion of the piece, and I'm gonna make it super hyper realistic. So if you haven't already, definitely consider subscribing because this is gonna be a multi-part series and it's gonna go over the course of, a couple weeks, maybe even a couple months, because I'm gonna be putting in some crazy, crazy details into this piece. So without further ado, let's get into it. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, what part do you want me to do next? I'm thinking of doing the nose. So basically I start off with redrawing the eye a bit. So the eye that I initially had was a very rough kind of triangle sketch, but I knew I wanted to make this really hyper realistic. So I decided to come in and reshape the eye in a more realistic sense. So the eye isn't actually a triangle, it's more of a curved cone. So you can see I'm working and reworking. I'm kind of testing out some highlights, but basically just doing some very simple pencil work, because when it comes to realism, you want to get a good base first, because you're going to be spending so much time on the details. So the first thing I did after that was come in with some charcoal. So the materials that I'm using are basically a 6B pencil, a charcoal little stick, and a blending stub. So you can see that I'm using the blending stub to add some basic shading to the iris. And I'm starting with the iris because I knew that that would be the most important part of the piece, especially when working with hyper realism. You want that to really pop, because when you are looking at someone in person, the eyes are the soul of that person. So when you're looking at a realistic piece, the eyes are the soul of the piece. So I came in with the blending stub. Now I'm coming in with my 6B pencil to add the details. Now I didn't have an actual charcoal pencil, which is why I'm switching between the kind of charcoal brick and the 6B pencil. So I'm going around adding these details to the filaments of the iris. And it's important to not just use a very detailed pencil, because when you're looking at anything, right, you have basic blocked in shading, which is why I started with the blending stub. And so basically now I am adding the details to add contrast. And I'm doing this in black and white, which is why contrast is very important. Contrast is always important with color, but you can add kind of some more simple contrast with differentiating colors. But since this is a monochrome piece, I'm going very much with the harsh lighting. Now also with this piece, I am not using a specific reference. So you can see that I'm coming in and making details, then kind of coming back in with the eraser. Now the eraser that I'm using is really awesome. So it's the classic gum eraser that you kind of need. Like what I mean by need is like you kind of tear it apart and dab on the charcoal, because it's really the only eraser that can dumb down charcoal once it's laid onto the paper. So you can see I worked on the iris in layers, and it's important when working with charcoal to do it in layers, because although you have that eraser that can take away some, it's really hard to erase charcoal. So I'm kind of coming in, laying down some charcoal, blending it out with the stub, coming in with the eraser, giving it some more white space, and then coming back in with my pencil. So I pretty much finished up the iris, and I'm adding some details around the eye. And so when it comes to adding details for hyperrealism, you have to think about things that you don't often think about. So you can see on the upper part of the lid, on the eyeball itself, I started to add some shadows, which I know will be there because I'm going to be adding eyelashes later. And I'm coming in with even smaller details with the veins of the eyes. Now, these are things that you can add without it looking weird, because if you're doing hyper realism, these are the details that are actually going to be there. Oftentimes it looks weird if you're adding veins in the eyes if you're just doing a very simplistic piece. But when it comes to hyper realism, it's totally fine to add that, and it adds a lot more depth to it without it making it look creepy. So now I'm adding more to the rest of the eye. I'm zooming out a bit for you guys to see. I wanted to start in zoomed in so you can really capture and take in all the details of the iris and the work that I put into that. And so you can also kind of see the rest of the piece. And so now I'm blending out and really working the rest of the eye. Now, I wanted to put as much detail into the skin and all of that as I did into the iris. And like I said before, I'm not working from a specific reference. I was looking at random photos of my face, and actually for the iris, I had taken a picture of my mom's eye to get a really detailed kind of patterning. But I did veer off from it a little bit. But my point is, that's why you see me working and reworking, and I think that's a very important thing to do as an artist, because then it makes it your own, and when you're done with the final product, there will be nothing like it in existence. And uniqueness is very, very key when it comes to art. So I'm adding a bunch of details. The main thing that I'm going about, when I'm doing this, is how can I add contrast? How can I add contrast to make things pop more? And that's the reason why you add contrast, and that's the reason why I'm going very dark in some places and very light in other places, because I really want it to pop. So right now I am going and working to pop the bottom lid of the eye to add depth. And that's one thing that contrast can really help with, is adding depth and adding texture. And I really wanted to make this piece look three-dimensional. So all art is really creating the illusion of 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. And that's even more and more important when you're trying to go for hyperrealism, because that's the whole point. You want it to look realistic. And for me, it's not just wanting to make it look like a photograph. It's when you're standing so close to it, it's almost like it's a sculpture, or it's popping out of the page. So I was having trouble with this part because I was using a very small blending stub, because that's the only blending stub that I did have. So I wanted it to make it very smooth, but it ended up being a little more textured than I wanted, which is why I was working and reworking. But I actually really liked that, and it turned out to be a happy accident, because I realized that it made it look like more of a skin texture. And so you can see the difference in smoothness from the part that is closest to the nose, from the part that is towards the jaw, to the cheekbone. So now I'm coming in with details for the eyebrow, and you can see me using the eraser to take apart one part of the eyebrow that I didn't like. I had a lot of trouble figuring out what I wanted to do with the eyebrow, because I couldn't get a good reference of mine. I was trying to take some selfies like this, just to try to get a good angle to reference. But I had a lot of fun with this eyebrow. I came in with some minor details with the 6B pencil. I blended it out to make it look more smooth. But yeah, this is the end part of this time lapse. I really had a good time doing it. When I finished, I was really happy with the result, and it honestly turned out to be a lot different than I was expecting. The final things that I added were the eyelashes, which also were a minor inconvenience when I was using the brick, but I realized if I made a very thin stroke and then came in to make it slightly thicker with my blending stub, it actually made it look really realistic, because it added a little bit of that depth of field, as if it were almost a photograph. So yeah, that is the end of this little time lapse. I am going to end my voiceover, and you are going to see an epic montage of the final product of this piece. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I had a ton of fun making it. I am excited to be continuing this piece, and I just want to be next to it so you can see the large scale of it. But yeah, so if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. If you're feeling kind, gently tap that like button. And as always, thank you for watching.